Well, welcome everybody. This is Gnarly Metal After Hours, a live rock and talk show featuring conversations with announcers, musicians, and fans about radio, rock, and records of the 80s. It's an extension of my Friday night music show, Gnarly Metal. My guest today is my former Kilo coworker, Justin Tyme. We actually had to reschedule this show. We were going to do this show on January 25th, and we ended up with a hell of a lot more snow than predicted. So we have rescheduled the show for today, and we're going to keep the theme of weather in mind. We've got a story relating to the weather that we'll go ahead and we'll talk about a little later on. But before we get to that discussion, I think it might be helpful to talk about Kilo, the radio station itself, and maybe do a bit of a rock and roll call to familiarize everyone with some of the great people we worked with. So, Justin, I thought we should maybe have you start by talking, I guess we'll go from the top up all the way down. The very top was Vice President and General Manager Lou Malini. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Lou? And I know you and he have a friendship that lasted beyond your time working at Kilo.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, this goes back to when I was in high school. Lou was the shining light at Kilo. I'm sure he still is. I mean, his name is so big in Colorado Springs and actually probably throughout Colorado and other places. You know, I always remember him. He just always dressed so sharp, was a wonderful boss. Him and I got along even afterwards because I started with Kilo when I was 16 years old. But later in life, reconnected with him too, and would go to his house, and he'd make meatballs, and he's Italian, and I knew his wife Laura. But yeah, it was just always like what I kind of aspired to be. It was just a good guy, and I can't say enough about the guy. I know recently he's passed, but
yeah, he did. I was sad to hear that he had passed away in 2023. It's interesting, when I was doing research for this show, what I discovered is 37 years. He started with Kilo in 1980.
Wow.
And was there until 2017. And that's pretty remarkable because I feel like for so many of us in the work world today, we don't have that kind of longevity in whatever job or career you might have. Some people do, but to be with one particular organization for a 30-year period of time is pretty remarkable.
It's very impressive. And yes, I'll give credit today too to another old colleague of mine. I'm long gone. I didn't make it 30 years, but Ross Ford is 30 years too. So that's pretty great of him. I follow them on Facebook, and I'm always, it's always a part of you, the Kilo family. Yeah.
Well, and that's the way I feel about it. There's this idea to me that we're Kilo alumni.
Yeah, I know.
We're part of this group that was this very unique radio station that started out in the early 80s. And if I remember correctly, I think it started out as a country station and then switched formats.
I sure think it did. I don't know the time frame on that, but I know when I started, it was around 1997, and they had all the stickers, and it said the 20 year, and they have billboards. Right. They had the bus stops with the logo and all that. So I think you're right, though, when it started country.
And in addition to Lou, there's Rich Hawk, who did make a considerable contribution to the station. And I was telling you before we went on the air, I was doing research for this, and I discovered that Wikipedia has an entry for Rich Hawk, and it describes him as being one of the fathers of active rock.
Yeah.
So specifically, Kilo's format is active rock.
That's right.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you remember we all did air checks for him.
Yes.
And it's like you just did not want to let him down, but he could always find something. And I don't want to say it would be critical, but he wanted to help you grow. But he would say KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Yes. He says, I'm not calling you stupid, but just, keep it to the point. And it just was one of those things where you always wanted to kind of impress him and every air check, try to do better. And if he criticized something, work on that. And he was a legend too.
Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah. And he unfortunately has passed away. He's no longer with us. But I remember there was one time you and I were working there, and you had come into the studio and said, Rich is going to go on the air. Mm-hmm. And you and I were there obviously about the same time. And I had never heard Rich on the air, but he had put together this really short segment that had just a little bit of a sound effect to it that really did a great job promoting the band that was coming up next. And I was like, oh, well, I'll be damned.
You're right. And afterwards, he had said something. He's like, I hadn't been on the radio in 10 years or
Yeah.
whatever it was, because I'm pretty sure he was there in the early 80s and he was a voice.
Yep.
But then when he came to PD, we were there. I think it was like a snowstorm or something like that,
Yes.
too. And I remember he was there, and there wasn't a lot of jocks, and he did do an intro or something to a song.
Yeah, and we can actually go there, since I said we'd talk about snowstorms. There's two stories that come to my mind, and the first one I remember was a blizzard, actually. And I could not get to work, and the station's engineer, a guy named John
Gray.
You remember John, right? And he had a Jeep, so Rich sent John to pick me up because my car would not have made it through the snow. And as John's driving me back to the station, we're seeing all of these cars in snowbanks on the side of the road.
Totally.
I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot of snow out here. And I ended up, and I think you were with me too. I know I was on the air with Brent Hatcher at the time, and Steve Pasco was there. And Steve Pasco went to a sofa that we had in the back of the station somewhere and slept there.
Yeah.
But Brent Hatcher and I, you and Rich, we were on the air overnight. And the next morning, John, of course, drove me home. And the sun had come out, so the snow started to melt a little bit. But one of the things that was funny that my husband still laughs about, so for the benefit of our listeners, my husband and I were dating at the time that I was working at Kilo. And obviously we have since gotten married, and we are still married today. But my husband, kind of a bit of a smartass, and he and his friend called while we were on the air, and they were like, well, thanks for telling us what the weather's going to be and what the driving conditions are, but most importantly, we need you to tell us what liquor stores are open.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and we're throwing around a lot of names here, so let's take a few moments and talk about people we refer to as like the Kilo alumni, and these are people we have worked with or who have worked with the station over time. And the first person I'll mention is our friend Rock and Roll Peg, because Peg's going to be joining me on February 22nd. So I'm going to have her as a guest. But there are plenty of other people. You mentioned Ross. So when I first started working there, Ross was co-hosting the morning show with Steve Ryan. Yep. So there's Ross, Steve Pasco, who I told you about. We called his moniker was the Pasco Fiasco.
Pasco Fiasco, right?
Right.
Oh, I can remember his voice. So it was so recognizable. So yeah,
he had a perfect voice.
He did
for rock radio.
For Kilo. Yeah,
Exactly.
And it was so different back then too. I just remember smoking inside.
Do you remember that? Yes.
I was an intern, and he said that, and I would watch him at the board because he was the like night 6 to 10 or something. And I remember just watching him in his cigarette smoke. It's so different now.
I know exactly. But there's a story about him. I think he was the one that helped you get your radio name. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes, he did, because I was just going by my first and last name and on my air check, and he was just like, wait a second, this is stupid. We've got to come up with something. So he came up with Justin Tyme, and he's like, but spell it a little differently. Don't do Time, do Justin Tyme. And it just stuck. And of course, all the other, jocks, Dave Hawkins and Dirk Kirkland, all these, they were like, yeah, go with that. So it just kind of, they gave it to me. And sometimes the best nicknames come from somebody giving it to you.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the case there.
Yep.
Other people that come to mind, you were talking about Bob Ely. So Bob Ely and Steve Ryan hosted the morning show before Ross came on.
Right. That's right. It was the Bob and Steve show. I think, again, I'm not, but I remember more Ross being the 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift right before Dave Hawkins. I would just nonstop listen. I mean, I'm 13, 14 years old. I mean, through high school, I lived and breathed Kilo. So that was like they didn't have cell phones. So I was like, all I wanted to do was and I was interested in the radio aspect of it too, the talking and the segues and things like that, and the music. So.
Yeah, well, there's plenty to be said for that. And I'm going to kind of insert a story here. When I was in college, I was home for, one break, a Christmas break, Thanksgiving, I'm not sure. Anyway, at the time, my family lived up in Parker, and there were two rock stations I remember listening to in Denver, KBPI and KAZY. But my brother actually turned me on to Kilo. So even though we were in Denver back in the late 80s at night, usually after 10 p.m., I remember listening to Kilo because we could pick up the signal from Colorado Springs. At the time I listened, much like you, my response was, this is a great station. I want to work here someday. And of course, my degree is in radio and television management and production. And I did find my way to working for Kilo. It took me a while, but I got there. But just like you, I was a Kilo listener before I was an employee. And being a listener is what made me say, I want to work here.
Exactly. I don't know why I always felt like Kilo, it wasn't like, maybe it was a little bit of competition. They were in Denver, but I felt like broadcasting off Cheyenne Mountain, that signal like reached Denver more than BPI reached the Springs. So
That's exactly right.
So it just felt like that. When I would go to Denver or go to the Rockies games or something, I mean, you'd switch it over to BPI, but I always had more of a heart for Kilo. It just felt like and I think it felt like they were just the original rock station.
Right.
So,
I think so too. And I still feel that way today. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but in terms of listening to radio stations, I have an easier time listening to Kilo than I do to some other radio stations. It's just, it's kind of a passion that has never really left me.
Yep.
Some of the new music I'm not as familiar with, some of the new rock, but it's okay. It's because I listen to it and I can get some additional exposure, and it helps me say, oh, okay, I like this band or I don't like this band. And, I think that's really the role of radio. And that's in large part why I wanted to do this show and bring on friends of mine who are announcers, because I feel like radio has had such a pivotal role in my life. I don't know that it's the same today, but it's my passion for it that just is kind of really, is never really faded away.
It's great. I mean, growing up with it and even going to other towns for vacation, and remember being like, let me just turn the dial to try to find the rock station, which I was really into, the active rock, and listening to other, it's a part of me too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about a weather themed story like I mentioned earlier. And one of them, of course, I was going to mention was the blizzard when we were all camping out at the station. But there's another weather themed story, and it's about the black dog.
Oh, the Kilo black dog. It was like an old 1980 Suburban or something. I don't know what year it was, but maybe.
I was going to ask you because I had no idea. Yeah. The nickname for the Kilo vehicle was the Black Dog, of course, taken after Led Zeppelin's song Black Dog.
Yep.
Anyway, Rich had asked me if I would be willing to do a remote. It was a cold and snowy day, and this was going to be my first time driving the Black Dog. And I was like, I got that deer in the headlights look, and I don't think I want to do this. And so he said, oh, no problem. I'll have Justin drive for you. So you and I went to do a remote, and you drove. And I am so grateful that you did, because just being a passenger in the Black Dog was a little frightening.
I don't know why. I would have been like 17, but I told them I took master drive or something. I was like, I'll drive, because I drove it around all the time for remotes or things like that as well. But I do remember doing that, and it was a little sketch, which it can be in Colorado Springs at certain times, but absolutely.
Exactly. Well, in full disclosure, I'm still a bit of a wimp when it comes to driving in the snow. I'll do it when I have to. I'd rather not if I don't have to.
Yeah. I'm not over here saying, with that, great. That was funny. Maybe he wanted off both of us. I'm just
and that's exactly what my memory was of that. Exactly what you said. Somebody, I think it was Steve Ryan, had made the implication that if Rich puts you in the Black Dog, it's because he's trying to get rid of you. But we did live to tell about it.
Totally. Yep.
Well, you are listening to Gnarly Metal After Hours on gnarly101.com. We're going to go into some music right now, and going to start off with Led Zeppelin's Black Dog. And then we've got 2 or 3 other songs that we're going to play, and we will come back after the break. My in-studio guest today, my friend Justin Tyme, former Kilo announcer. And we hope you stick around through the music, come back and listen to what we've got to talk about on the flip side.
Yeah, that was a good time. And again, I think that was 1997. And I'm listening to that back too. And I can, maybe the listeners won't know this, but underneath that bed, we'd always like have the same underlying music underneath us when we were talking, and it would be like Prong and all these other bands. But that's a really good clip. Jeez.
Well, you did a great job. And actually, I've probably told you this before, but when you sent that clip to me, I had been visiting with family, and my brother was hanging out with me, and I was like, oh, you've got to hear this. And he listened, and he's like, wow, who's that guy? He's really good. He said, yeah, he is.
High schooler around here. Thank you. Yeah, I do get that from time to time, meeting somebody. Did you ever work in radio, or your voice is radio? My
Yes.
wife tells me that. So a long
Yeah.
time ago, I did.
Yep. So, what are some of your best memories from working in radio, specifically at Kilo? I don't know, opportunities to meet bands, go to concerts.
Yeah, I mean,
what
it
are
was
some of the fun or funny memories you have?
I mean, I'll get into the bands, but I mean, there was a man up front that we haven't even spoke about, but I think you'll remember him. His name was Phil Lawless.
Oh, of course, Big Phil. Yes.
Yeah, Big Phil. And I don't know. I was younger, and you just get into this role and you're meeting all these people from different walks of life. And I remember talking tennis with him. And then all of a sudden, like, that was a weird way. I kind of got into tennis and started playing some of that in high school. So you just have people that kind of touch you through your younger years and through later in life too. But we went to Old Chicago with Corrosion of Conformity one night. And again, this is just a dream for me because I'm 17 years old and thinking, this is the most amazing thing ever. Going with Rock and Roll Peg and other disc jockeys and just getting to see Metallica at it would have been McNichols Arena back then, Red Rocks with Queensryche, meeting bands, meeting Fu Manchu, The Refreshments, Piston was another band. It just literally a dream come true for me in high school. And even in my yearbook, I went Cheyenne Mountain High School. It says just a part-time gig at Kilo 94.3. So yeah, I felt on top of the world. It was awesome.
Tell me about your love and your passion for music. You and I were talking about this off the air, but I've mentioned many times before that the reason I got into radio is because I love the music. Is it the same for you? Do you feel that same passion?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I grew up with, my dad would listen to the Doors and Zeppelin, bands like that. And I just remember really getting into that. And I really got into Guns N' Roses in the 80s and I really enjoyed them. And it was just, I just craved that new rock music from age 8 until, 25 or 30 and just really enjoyed it. So yeah, the music was a big part. Definitely wanted to work for Kilo. There was no other station in the Springs that even came close for me.
Right. I have a question I'm going to ask you just for fun. And this is a question that I ask many of the announcers that I interview and that I speak with from time to time. My friend Leah Miller, she is a friend of mine from college, and she worked at KUKQ in Phoenix. And Leah talks about something she calls radio mares, MARES, which for people who work in radio, it is a nightmare. What happens when you're working in a radio station and things go wrong? For example, you've got that dead air, or one of mine is I go to put music on, like to get a record, and there are no records or anything at all like that. Do you have radio mares? Because I still have them.
Well, I mean, one that did happen to me, and it just was one of those things, and I don't know if I'll describe the technical term right, but when you go off the air and you pull the lever down to turn your mic off, I had left it on and then picked up a call, and I was talking over the music and felt like such an idiot. And I don't even remember what I was saying, but then all of a sudden I see all the board, all these like more phone calls coming in, and I was like, oh, okay, well, because I was doing overnights on the weekend, and I just remember thinking, okay, and I hung up, and then I answer, and then I think I was like, we can hear you talking. What are you doing over the like?
Oh my gosh.
Totally stupid, like talking over. And that's one of the times I was like, oh, I'm hoping Rich Hawk doesn't listen. It's 2 a.m. right now, so he's probably not listening. I'm doing overnights, but oh my gosh, he would have been bad. But of course, dead air. Everything was on these, you play it on CDs, or your carts would be commercials, but not having that in order, or, screwing those things up. I was really meticulous on wanting to segue perfectly and queuing up my music. So yeah, just not getting that right would be one of those things for me.
I mean, that's a time and place, and we've talked about this before, where radio was live, like what we do here at gnarly101.com. And live radio is, in my opinion, nearly perfect. But that's part of the appeal of it for me as an announcer. And I hope that the people who listen get a bit of an enjoyment out of it, knowing that, oh, okay, well, sometimes stuff like that happens and, things can be out of your control. I'm going to tell a story here that I was holding for later in the show, but I'll go ahead and do it now. We've mentioned a number of people that we worked with. One of the things that I used to do for Kilo was traffic reports. And And the traffic report required that I would get up at the butt crack of dawn and get to work very early in the morning. And then I would go ahead and I would gather information to put together a traffic report. At the time, I had just started dating my husband, and he and I were spending a lot of time together, which was a good thing. But we had been up late the night before. I was up early in the morning, and I went to do my first traffic report for Kilo, and Ross and Mo were doing the morning show at the time. And I was giving the traffic report, and I was intending to describe I-25, the interstate. But what I ended up saying was intercourse.
Oh, you did.
And when you talk
that's on the morning show.
That's on the morning show. And, so fortunately, it was quite fitting that it was on a rock station. And, I could get by kind of stumbling through like, oh, spend the night with my boyfriend last night. That might be why it came out the way it did. But those are those moments that make for great radio. I mean, even when we're embarrassed by them.
I mean, and my mind goes, so in the Kilo studio, I don't know if they still have it, but there was, when the phone rang, but when the boss would ring, it was like this red light. You'd be, oh no, that's Rich Hawk listening, and he's going to tell me,
the red light of doom.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Let's talk a little bit about concerts. As most people can imagine, concerts were definitely a perk of working in the radio industry. And I'm going to ask a question which you may or may not have the answer to. Do you have any idea how many concerts you have seen in your lifetime?
Well, it's a lot. I would say I've seen, 100 at least. I don't know if that's probably people have seen more, but yeah, I'd say 100 to 150 shows I've been to. So and I still go to a couple a year.
Yeah.
How about you?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely no idea.
Okay.
I know that much like you, I still go to concerts. I go less frequently than I used to, in part because ticket prices can sometimes be a little steep.
Yep.
But the other part is so many of the bands whom I've wanted to see in concert, I've already seen in concert. And although I would enjoy seeing them again, if I don't have the opportunity to do it, I'm not entirely heartbroken. So that being said, any band who you haven't not seen in concert, who you wish you could see in concert, and I'm talking about musicians alive or dead, anybody who just comes to mind.
I mean, Tom Petty, I know Soundgarden, I had always wished I had seen. Luckily, I did get to see early on, like Rage Against the Machine when they went to Fiddler's Green in '97. So there's some more that I think of, wow, I got to see them. But I recently went to Power Trip Festival. That was a big thing. My wife and I in Palm Springs, my uncle lives out there, and I had saw that. And he said, well, you have a place to stay. Just get your tickets, come out. And I'm like, let's do this. And it was Metallica, Tool, Guns N' Roses, Iron Maiden. Ozzy was supposed to play. I don't know if you know that. He was supposed to. Now he just announced that they're doing a tour or one last one in London. A friend of mine was like, come do that with me. It's July 5th. I can't do that. But Ozzy was supposed to play. Iron Maiden took over for that spot. But that was really cool. That was just in the fall of 2023.
Yes.
And going to the Coachella grounds and seeing all of those old bands. Oh, and AC/DC. I'm forgetting that. Geez, the AC/DC. I saw them. So that would have been one that I'm glad I got to see them.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And it's interesting you were talking about Ozzy. Do you remember when we went to Ozfest up at Mile High Stadium and they had Ozzy and his bandmates do a Black Sabbath reunion?
Totally.
And that was one of those shows I never thought I would see. Yeah. So I was kind of blown away when that happened. Yep. And Ozfest, so Marilyn Manson, I had seen Marilyn Manson there. Slipknot was there. I'm trying to remember who else.
Did Korn do that? Or I don't know.
I think Korn might have been there.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of seeing multiple bands during the course of the day, or in your case, the course of a weekend, is just like, oh my gosh. It's pretty cool. How do you not love doing something like that? Yeah. Is there any band you've seen in concert multiple times?
Yeah, that's an easy question. I know, and you have never even told you this. It's the band Tool. So whenever Tool comes, I spend more money than I always get good tickets. I mean, that is for me, the band that I have to see if they're in Denver or in Colorado Springs for sure. They played a lot at the World Arena, believe it or not. So I've been very lucky to have them. They seem to always come here, and I've seen a Perfect Circle a lot too. I really like Maynard Keenan and what they've done.
Yeah. exactly. I agree with you. I've seen Tool once in concert, and that's when we were at Kilo. And it just was one of those moments when I found out they were going to be in concert. My response was the same as yours. It's like, I'm going. I don't know how, but I definitely have to see them in concert.
So to this day, it's, they're not actively touring. Well, actually, I'll take that back. They are doing a tour. I follow them on Facebook, and they're doing, you may not know this, they're doing like a Fun in the Sun in Cancun or something like that. And they're going to be playing there. I'm like, that'd be cool, but I'm not going.
I have a friend of mine from Salida, and he had posted on Facebook something that I didn't realize was a thing, but they're like these rock cruises. And so when you said the Fun in the Sun thing in Cancun, I was like, okay, well, it's been a long time since we've been to Cancun. But that being said, I guess there's also cruises you can go on. And I was like, wow, if you're a rock star, that's got to be pretty fun way to meet many of your fans.
Absolutely.
Yep. Now, my friend who went said actually it was a great time. He and his wife had a lot of fun. He was a little taken aback, though, by how many people were actually on the cruise ship. He said the numbers were just far higher than he expected. He thought it would be a little bit more intimate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So gotcha. Yep.
Well, clearly you and I are metalheads, and we have our passion of rock and roll. Are there any other genres or different types of music that you like to listen to aside from rock?
Good question. And yes, there is. My wife would probably say I listen to too much of it, but I have gotten into electronic music. I really like the Canadian DJ Deadmau5. So I see him all the time when he comes to Red Rocks. That's another one that I kind of get to. But still, rock is my passion, but I have gotten into some of that electronic music too, believe it or not. So
yeah, I do. Actually, last week there was a band called Cryptic Writings Authentic Megadeth Experience, who I had in studio as my guest. Their drummer, Stefan, was talking about a form of music he referred to as a guilty pleasure called baby metal. And I have to be 100% honest, I never even knew it existed until my daughter said, there's such a thing as baby metal. I'm like,
I don't know.
I'm not going to...
you don't even want to look at it. I'll look it up.
All right. All of you listening, thank you for hanging out and listening this afternoon. We've got some music on the way, some rock to be specific, including some of the bands that Justin had talked about earlier this hour. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll get into some music here. Then we'll come back and wrap things up. Stay close. You're listening to Gnarly101.com. That is one of the songs that I know for a fact you and I played when we were on Kilo.
Of course.
Yes, and you were talking about seeing Queensryche in concert. I mean, I was so thrilled to be able to check their show out in Red Rocks. That was incredible.
You were there then.
Yes,
that's where I remember that. And that was, I think it was my first Red Rock show. So it was awesome.
It was a great show. And Jeff Tate now is doing a tour this year. He is doing the entire Operation Mindcrime from beginning to end. I think it's Jeff Tate's Queensryche is how because I don't think it's the original band.
It's not the original. Yeah, I think I remember seeing that, but that'd be cool to see.
Yeah, absolutely. My friend Justin Tyme joining me in studio today, and this is Gnarly Metal After Hours. We're getting really close to wrapping up our show here. But before we leave, Justin, I'm going to put you on the spot. This is a segment of the show that I refer to as either or. These questions raise a little controversy among people who listen, but remember, we're just sharing our opinions here. That's all it is. First question, Metallica or Megadeth?
Metallica.
Second question, David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar?
I'm going with David Lee Roth.
Yep, totally. Okay. Third question, whiskey, beer, or something else?
Whiskey. Yeah, for sure. If my wife's listening, she's going to say, like, you've been buying too much of that.
Well, it's then, our house looks the same way. Now, I only drink a little bit. I don't drink nearly as often as I used to, but whiskey was always one of my favorite choices. And my husband now has a vast collection of whiskey and bourbon in our house. And
I should trade some bottles with him.
Exactly. All right, 2 more questions real quickly, then we're going to wrap up for today. Now, for those of you who have listened to the show before, you know that there is a website called the National Day Calendar. And the National Day Calendar, their motto is to celebrate every day, which I wholeheartedly agree. Tomorrow, not only is Super Bowl Sunday, but tomorrow is also National Pizza Day and National Pork Rind Day. So for you, Justin, your favorite flavor or topping of pizza?
It's pretty simple. Pepperoni, but I want jalapenos on. That's so. I like a little spice to it, and that's what I'm taking.
All right. And now, are you a fan of pork rinds?
Not a fan,
Ugh.
but if somebody said eat this, I guess I would try. I've had them before, so
Yeah. Yep. And see, I haven't. And you and I talked about this off the air, but I can't get past the smell.
Yeah. No, I don't. I wouldn't say I hate them. I'm kind of neutral. There's none in my house. I can tell you that.
Yep. Well, before we finish up here today, Justin, any closing words, closing thoughts, anything you'd like to say?
No, thank you for having me. It's been a long time since I've really been on the radio. I'm kind of in the finance world now. I got out of this genre, but I still, it's near and dear to my heart. That was early on in my career. So, and I was always loved working with you early on.
Likewise.
So, yeah,
Yes.
I really appreciate you having me on.
Yes. Well, you are very welcome. I'm glad you could be here today. You've been listening to Gnarly Metal After Hours, a live rock and talk show featuring conversations with radio announcers, musicians, and fans about radio, rock, and records from the 80s. A replay of this show is going to be posted to my YouTube channel at Gnarly Metal After Hours. I hope to get that done within the next week or so. And don't forget to join me every Friday night for Gnarly Metal, 2 hours of hard rock and heavy metal hits from the 80s. It's on from 4 until 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and you can find Gnarly Metal show pages on Facebook and Instagram at Gnarly Metal. I'm Kelly Thomas, and until next time, have a great weekend. Peace, and keep it right here on gnarly101.com for the very best of the 80s.